As far as the energy chain is concerned, there are special issues to consider, and particularly from the political and trade points of view. And so what's going to be difficult today is to cover all of these aspects, and particularly energy security and how we can ensure that the product is getting across. And that's why today I'm very happy to have all of our panelists who are well known, and I'd like to present to you from right to left Michel Delvey, who's president of the Confrontations Europe and the president and Maison de l'Europe de Paris. He was senior advisor at the Parthenon and former general secretary, member of the Energy Management Board from 2013 to 2019. He's a French essayist and specialized in energy and thinking of energy transition. And I must admit that I can only recommend him. Because it's the book he wrote was very good on energy transition. Then we have Annabelle Livet, who is Deputy Director of European and International Affairs at the CRE, which is the Energy Regulation Commission. And she's also Vice President of the Institutional Affairs Group of the Association of Mediterranean Energy Regulators, that is MEDREG. And she will give us the European flavor. Then we have Eric Baldecchi, who's currently leading the Threat Intelligence and Analysis department at Total's Global Security Intelligence Department, and he's served in operational units in France and abroad, as well as in central administration and French embassies as a defense attaché. And then I'm delighted to have Elaï Rettig, who was unfortunately prevented from coming for logistical reasons and geopolitical reasons. And Elaï Rettig is assistant professor at the Department of Political Studies at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. He also serves as the head of the energy division at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies and specializes in energy geopolitics and Israeli foreign policy and regional environmental politics, which is highly important for the region. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you all. So Elaï, what I suggest you do is to open the open fire. We do have a translation for you, and Elaï himself is an English speaker. So if you want to listen to it, Elaï in French, it's time to put on your headsets. So Elaï, we're delighted to hear you and listen to your introduction for this keynote session.
Well, I hope you can hear me well. I have two apologies to make. One is that I'm speaking in English. I can't help that. The other is that I couldn't be there with you. I tried my best, but because of the war, all of the flights in and out of Israel are canceled, and the conference organizers did their best to try to get me there anyway, and I really thank them for that, but apparently it couldn't have been made, and I'm glad that I could still speak before you. So Annabelle asked me to, instead of the panel, because I have the translation issues, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes, right? Give kind of a keynote speech, and then that could be a good background to the discussion. And I want to do this with maps, because it's hard to kind of make the point without showing maps, because I want to show that in the past 2 years, because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, new opportunities regarding energy cooperation were created in the East Mediterranean region. New opportunities that if we play our cards right, can really lead to an integration, not between only the countries of the East Mediterranean, but between the East Mediterranean and the Gulf, the Arab Gulf region, to the point where it's almost one region in terms of oil transport, in terms of energy production, and in terms of electricity transmission. So, and the war between Israel and Hamas I will argue, have not changed these calculations. So I will try to present a map here, and hopefully you can see this. Okay, great. I see you can see this. Okay, great. So I will start with oil. I will separate between oil and gas. Both have had major changes in the East Mediterranean because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. The first is oil. When we look at the global map of oil, 2 years ago, until 2 years ago, this is how it looked like. 22 million barrels of oil coming through the Straits of Hormuz every single day, and 70% of the oil in the Gulf went east, went to India, to China, to South Korea, to Japan. Whereas 70% of Russian oil went west via pipeline to Europe. This is how things used to look like. But because of the war, in the past 2 years, the transit of oil has shifted to the opposite directions. Because Europe doesn't want to buy Russian oil anymore, then we see Russian oil, instead of moving west, they're moving east to China and to India. They're being sold at a very deep discount, 30% sometimes, 40%. And they're eating away market share from the Gulf region, which are usually the main suppliers for India and China. Now, the way Russia gets to these markets is, one, through the northern route, right, through the Arctic, which is becoming easier because of climate change, because of glacier melting. It's working in Russia's favor. And the other route is, as you can see, it's through the East Mediterranean. It's going down the Black Sea or through the Straits of Gibraltar and going down the Suez Canal, down the Red Sea, down the Bab el-Mandeb, and into India and China. And so it's eating away market share from the Gulf. Now, on the opposite end, because Europe is not using Russian oil anymore, it's asking the Arab Gulf states to supply it with oil. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc., oil and liquefied natural gas. And so instead of that oil going through the Straits of Hormuz and continuing east, it's going the opposite direction. It's going up the Bab el-Mandeb, up the Red Sea, up the Suez Canal, and into the East Mediterranean and into Europe. So what we're seeing in the past 2 years is a very, very busy East Mediterranean, where the number of LNG tankers and oil tankers have tripled this year compared to 2 years ago before the war. So it's becoming a very busy region. It requires coordination. It's making Greek sailors very rich, right? Because they're operating a lot of this, but it's also creating some challenges. One of them would be an environmental challenge. If we have so many oil tankers going through this area, if there's a spill, even in one of them, well, it's a small bathtub. If there's a spill in Port Said, in the Suez Canal, that oil goes up to Israel, up to Lebanon, up to Syria, and up to Turkey. That's how the water currents will take it. So this requires all of the countries in the area, whether they like each other or not, to cooperate over monitoring the oil ships, over preventing any leaks, etc. But more than that, because the Red Sea is becoming so busy with LNG tankers and oil tankers, it's also becoming a security threat. So we see a lot of oil and LNG tankers going through the Bab el-Mandeb, up the Red Sea, and into the East Med. And that is a target for Irani sabotage, especially through the Houthi rebels that sit right on the Bab el-Mandeb in Yemen. We've seen now how Iran is operating the Houthi rebels to fire missiles at Israel right now during the war. And all of that creates a threat to to tankers, to Saudi tankers and Emirati tankers. You know, when Iran threatens to block the Straits of Hormuz, which it often does, it's kind of like shooting yourself in the head, because Iran also needs the Straits of Hormuz to pass its own oil. So it's a threat, but it's not a very credible threat. Whereas to block the Bab el-Mandeb, that is a credible threat for Iran, because Iran doesn't ship its oil through the Bab el-Mandeb, because Europe doesn't buy Iranian oil. So it's mainly a threat to Saudi and Emirati oil. And so what we're seeing in the past 2 years is a lot of naval cooperation between the Navy forces of Israel, of Greece, of Cyprus, and other countries, and Egypt, of course, together with the navies of the United Arab Emirates, right, their counterparts in Saudi Arabia, etc., to the point where it's becoming one region in terms of the security of the maritime route. What this is doing, it's also pushing for another solution to make this area less unstable in terms of maritime passage, and that's building an energy corridor. Right? This is a map that was signed 2 months ago during the G20 summit that was for the first time take place in India. And it was signed by India, the US, the EU, and Saudi Arabia. And the idea is to create kind of this alternative land corridor to transport goods that won't have to go through the Bab el-Mandeb and get into the bottleneck of the Suez Canal and completely bypass it by getting to Haifa and from there to Europe. It starts as a railway, it continues as an electric grid, and then a hydrogen pipeline, perhaps, maybe in the future. Now, we shouldn't exaggerate regarding this corridor. This corridor does not replace dependence on Russia. It does not replace the China Belt and Road Initiative, but it is a small alternative. It is a supplement. And the war between Israel and Gaza has only strengthened the idea that this corridor makes sense, because the war is reminding people that the Bab el-Mandeb is not the most stable area. The Straits of Hormuz is often under threat. And ironically, although the war is right on the East Mediterranean, it shows Europe that getting some of its resources, at least in this case, gas, from the East Mediterranean is safer than getting it through all of these dangerous straits. And so that leads me to the other issue, which is natural gas production and export from the East Mediterranean to Europe. We know that in the past 10 years, ever since Israel found a lot of gas and Egypt also found and Cyprus found a small Aphrodite gas field, there was a lot of attempts to build major infrastructure into Europe, whether through a pipeline or whether through LNG facilities. And there's a lot of options on the table. There's a lot of options on the table. Whether it's the RSMed pipeline to Greece, which I think is very, very expensive. It's going to be very hard to build it even without the politics, just the economics of this pipeline. Either a pipeline to Turkey, which I can say pretty confidently is out of the table completely after this war and Turkey taking such an anti-Israeli stance during this war. I do not see any Israelis agreeing to build a permanent pipeline to Turkey at this point. But it seems that a liquefied natural gas terminal is much more viable. And so you have different options, LNG in Cyprus, a floating LNG, a third LNG terminal in Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that. But it seems that Europe is pushing the RSMed to the LNG option. And Europe is kind of given up or is tired of pipeline politics and the politics of transit states, et cetera. And Europe in the past 2 years has been investing a lot in LNG intake terminals. Until 2 years ago, most of the LNG intake capacity was in West Europe. But now there's a lot of new LNG intake facilities being built, all of these green dots that you're seeing, in Center and East Europe. And so that will create a lot more demand for LNG in Europe. It gives it a lot of flexibility. If it builds a pipeline, that it needs to commit to a pipeline for 15 years. But if it builds an LNG facility, it doesn't need to commit to you. It can buy LNG from a lot of places. It also makes sense for the countries of this region, because if Europe keeps saying that it wants natural gas right now, but in 20 years it wants to stop using natural gas, then this provides the flexibility that these countries, Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, want in order to, okay, if Europe doesn't want our LNG, then we can move it to Asia, to China, to India, et cetera. But it gives us the flexibility. We're not locked into a customer that keeps telling us that it doesn't want long-term gas. And so and with this, I will end. How has the war in Gaza affected these trends? Israel is doing its best to show that it has not affected these trends. I mean, it's really going out of the way to try to promise the energy community that all of these projects are still underway. These are long-term projects, whether it's an LNG facility or a pipeline. This is 3, 4, 5 years into the future, and this war is not supposed to immediately affect it. And so Israel, you can see that it has published just a few days ago the awards for the new offshore bid round in Israel, where SOCAR and BP won a bid to drill for new gas in the north, and Eni and Dana Petroleum won a bid in the south. Again, they submitted these bids back in June, so it has nothing to do with the war. But Israel made sure to make this announcement during the war to show that it's still, all of these plans are still in place. And you can see that one of the first leaders that came to Israel during the war to show its support of Israel is the Prime Minister of Greece and the President of Cyprus, to show that these projects are still underway. Turkey, however, has kind of taken itself out of the game, and that's something to discuss. And in the day after the war, whatever that will look like, whether Hamas is still there, whether it's something else, a lot of money is going to flow for the reconstruction of Gaza. And the first thing that needs to be reconstructed in Gaza is electricity, water, and gas infrastructure. And for that, there are a lot of impending projects that were already approved this year and will probably be even more accelerated after the war. It sounds paradoxical because usually war stops development, but in this case, the war will only accelerate because Hamas is no longer there to kind of stop these projects from happening, which is what they have been doing in the past year. So whether it's the development of the Gaza Marine Field, which Israel already approved in June, whether it's the Gas for Gaza project to build a new gas power plant in Gaza, whether it's connecting Gaza with the West Bank through electricity grids, all of that will likely be accelerated after the war and paid for with a lot of foreign aid to reconstruct Gaza. So I'm optimistic. I know not everyone shares this optimism, but I hope this is how our future will look like. So thank you for giving me the time to give this keynote speech, and I hope you followed. I know I speak fast.
Many, many thanks, Elaï, for this very precious contribution and also this, regional approach, actually, which is extremely important, especially for us from the European side. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing, so many thanks in any case. We come back to you. Donc, merci, voilà, Elaï.
So thank you again, Elaï, for his contribution, which is very valuable. Given the approach seen from Israel on the other side of the Mediterranean. And now, Michel, let's see what the energy flows are looking like and whether they're changing structurally or not in Europe, because we're no longer talking about the continent, and we're talking more about decontinentalization of energy flows, but it's going to be a question of knowing how, in the European Union, how the vision regarding energy is changing or has changed over the past few years, and where we're at today. Thank you, Annabelle, for this fine presentation. And what's changed since 2022 is that things have changed from the defense point of view, military points of view, and energy points of view. And also, as far as energy is concerned, the Europeans have been shifting from one foot to the other. And it has to do with being less naive with Russia or with any other business partner. Mr. Putin, of course, has said that energy is geopolitical. It gives power and it gives influence. And there was one of the major economists who was called Jean-Marie Chevalier, who wrote a book, a remarkable book called The Major Battles of Energy. And by definition, it's highly connected to defense, sovereignty, and power. But Europeans have overlooked this and forgotten this a bit, and particularly with Russia. And whereas Putin in 2007 and 2008 put the pressure on Europe, particularly by talking about sending the gas or the oil via the Ukraine, and building what has now come to be called energy independence, the energy independence route. And there are various French companies involved, of course, since then. But we've also suffered the fact that Mr. Putin has actually put in place retortion measures and is distributing the oil flows and the gas flows via different traders, different channels, whether it be in the Gulf or elsewhere, and it is still doing business and making a lot of money. And with the interconnections we've seen, business is still working well. So the sanctions that were actually implemented at one point in time, people thought that this was going to change matters a great deal. But what seemed important is, from the geopolitical point of view, in Europe, as you know as well as I do, energy is going to be the major pacifier for the the French and the Germans. It's going to be a major treaty that's 6 years after the war that they were able to put together an economic cooperation organization. And that was the Marshall Plan plus a treaty called the CEA Euratom Treaty. So energy can be two sides of the same coin. And on the one hand, you have war and power, but it can also be peace and pacification. And our friend has just said that in the event of a conflict, the interconnections will no longer exist. And with the Germans, since 1945, we've had lots of interconnections between France and Germany, and because of the signs of friendship between France and Germany. And now, without being naive, and this morning Natalie was talking about being naive, but we're not talking about subjects that are really like potatoes or I mean, potatoes are very important, but we're talking about challenges that are far more important. And as far as water treatment's concerned, that's another issue too, and that has major political implications, if not economic implications. So regarding all of these matters that do lead to trade, we have to consolidate matters and see who's going to be doing what. So in Europe, this means preparing. It's very important to keep on talking to each other and not stick to one's own guns, as it were, from the national point of view, or being nationalistic, and having the opportunity of buying power produced by the next door neighbor, and enabling us to light up our houses and elsewhere. But also being able to do something about the North African grid via Gibraltar. Very, very quickly, we can get power to Turkey, and not so long ago, Turkey was connected to the European grid. And things have changed a lot, as Annabelle was saying, as far as the systems are concerned. When we re-established power in March and April last year in Ukraine, because the Ukrainians needed power, it was a major technical and economic but political decision. And all of this we need to look at in a global perspective and realize that, yes, there is geopolitics also behind all of this. But we need to realize that if we're not going to be pessimistic and being defensive, there's also diplomacy that's going to help as well. And as far as this particular conference is concerned, there are two things we need to do. That is more dialogue in the Mediterranean regarding co-development, energy, joint ventures, and going back to the years 2000, when there were plenty of ways of spanning the gap in the Mediterranean for things like gas and electricity, and providing more contact currently between the north and south of the Mediterranean. Okay, thank you very much, Michel. So regarding systems, as you said, there's the geopolitical issue, sorry, and then as far as the flows are concerned, I'd like to come back to Annalise and ask her what she thinks about the role of the regulators, which is a role that people sometimes overlook, but it's absolutely crucial. And maybe, well, I know that CRE, that is the Energy Regulatory Commission, is an important body, and as far as Europe's concerned, geopolitically, the power systems, national power systems, have been hit or impacted one way or another. And as far as CRE is concerned, there are contacts permitting dialogue and also cooperation. Annalisa. Well, look, thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At the CRE where I work, we're more or less the gendarmes of the power universe, as it were, but the Commission, of course, is trying to make sure that the electricity and gas markets work suitably to defend the interests of the end consumer. But we were set up by the European setup, particularly from the legal point of view. And as far as the Mediterranean is concerned, we're very active inside an association called MEDREG, MEDREG, for the Mediterranean, where all of the regulators, if there are some in all of the countries, come together to talk. With the Lebanese authorities, we tend to be working on setting up their own CRE, Energy Regulation Commission. It has to do essentially with having a Euro-Mediterranean market for energy. In 2007, we set up this particular entity, and particularly, as Elaï was saying earlier on, in the Eastern Mediterranean, there are lots of resources available, and diversification is possible for gas. And in addition to this, at MEDREG, there are plenty of things that we need to talk about, as you were saying earlier on. That is interconnections, as far as MEDREG's concerned, for gas and electricity. The grids can interconnect, and possibly not everywhere, but not always being used either for either political or other different reasons. And we talk about renewable energies too, and how they can be integrated. And we need to understand that what we can do, because some countries are ahead of the game, whereas others are dragging a little bit behind. We can also talk about governance too, because it's a very important matter for the system as a whole. And that's as much as we can see for the multilateral setup as far as MEDREG's concerned. But I also need to mention that there's Portugal as well to consider. Portugal is not a riparian state as far as the Mediterranean is concerned, but there's a lot of cooperation going on with Portugal and the rest of the Mediterranean. With Morocco too, we've had cooperation too, and Albania too, still ongoing, and Lebanon, which is going to be coming online soon. Okay, thank you, Annalisa. Yes, indeed. This time I'd like to ask Eric what he thinks, or what his point of view is from the multinational point of view, because for a company that's doing business in energy and power in the area, and particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also in the Gulf, on the one hand, there's a lot of traffic, of course, a lot of maritime traffic, and more in fact. And as far as the geopolitical issues are concerned that are really coming to the fore, what can you say about whether this impacts your company or not, and how do you manage these situations? Thank you, Annabelle. I was going to be talking about Total Energy as well, but when it comes to safety, or rather security, as far as security is concerned, without talking about commercial matters and also business matters, as Elaï was saying previously, and previous speakers, from inside Total, we have another vision, as we've been impacted by the war in the Ukraine, of course, and also the war in Gaza. And as Elaï was saying, the maps are changing, and we've looked at what's been happening from inside the countries, particularly for energy flows. And in our department, we've had to accompany this and keep abreast of developments. And the fact is that we've been able to do all of this while bearing in mind the development requirements for natural gas, or natural liquid gas. And LNG is something of a transition towards renewable energies. So for us, from inside the company, this is one way for looking at the three fronts, that is maintaining historical business of the company in as far as oil is concerned, do more with LNG as being a transition medium, and then at the same time beginning to work and pushing forward on other projects regarding renewable energies like wind farms, offshore wind farms, and also sun power. All, of course, this has led to an acceleration as far as our business is concerned from a general point of view, and I'd like to take this opportunity to raise a bit more awareness regarding how we view matters in a multinational setting, particularly with a backdrop of what's been happening in Gaza recently and for some time already in Ukraine. As far as all of our businesses are concerned, we're doing business well in 130 countries, and we have 100,000 people working for the company. And all of the fields that we work in at Total Energy is fully integrated as far as energy is concerned, and particularly upstream and downstream. And we've got a big challenge, and that is currently to support the business and new businesses too for the company in places where it can be very complicated. In Nigeria being an example, inter alia, then South America as well, with new projects where we're being confronted with new types of threats that we weren't always used to being prepared for. And I'd like to be more or less a spokesman for Mr. Favier, my Director General, who ever since he started working at Total Energy has been saying that increasingly in the current context, as things stand today, security is going to be really the game changer as far as the operational decisions, as far as Total is concerned. And also at the same time, the power sector is a bit like a bubble where people feel more or less protected, but we've been caught up by what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the company's been impacted by both of these wars. And at the same time, as far as Ukraine is concerned and the war there, what's been important for us is to support the disengagement of Russia. Russia's been an essential partner for Total Energy, and also do the same as far as Russia is concerned, in addition to reposition on other markets, as has been said, particularly for the gas market. And this has, of course, been something of a challenge for us, and it's essential for us, and we need to be able to secure enough gas for Europe and secure the channels via which we receive the LNG, for example. There's also the FSRU, that is the storage and regasification units that we need to protect, FSRUs. With the FSRUs, I'm not an expert, but what I've understood about FSRUs is that with gas, it comes in as a gas, then it's liquefied in the liquefaction units on the coastline, and then the methane transporter comes up and picks up the liquid gas and ships it. And then it's regasified in the terminal, and it can then be injected into the pipelines. The thing about FSRUs is that these ships actually do float. That's the big matter. That's the big item. That's right. We've been able to test the reactivity on the part of the company and do something as far as the gas from Russia is concerned almost instantaneously, and set up FSRUs and regasify liquid gas. And the first one was in Lumin in Germany, exactly where the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, ended up, and what we've all just implemented a few days back, when the first methane carrier arrived to supply the French market in Le Havre.
So if you wish for the analysis regarding Hamas, we have strategic lever, actually, which could perturb and disturb European activities, but also securing platforms in the North Sea that are clearly draw our attention, especially regarding the war in Ukraine. Of course, for the crisis in Gaza, and the situation is not less so, but not in the same to the same extent. We're historically present in the Middle East. In March 24, we will be celebrating our years present there. And of course, the priority for us is ensuring protection of our partners and those we cooperate with, and pursuing activity. Security is our priority, protecting our collaboration and pursuing our activity, because there's no question of stopping our activity. And so with respect to the case of the war on the Gaza Strip, of course, we've got Iraq as well, and gas gross integrated project, which is a huge energy project, which will be operational in a few days in the Basra province in Iraq. And so we really were strongly impacted, and we reorganized ourselves very, very quickly and ensured the continuity of our flow, especially through Europe. And yes, and so Michel, I'm looking because I know you have to leave soon. And it's true that this responds or answers partially one of the questions. From a European point of view, we did understand that within this framework, the main word was diversifying energy procurement. And so we know that, we have to partner with the maximum number of countries, and of course, it's very complex, especially with what we've just experienced with Russia. So the idea would be, Michel, how could the European Union envisage energy partnering with these countries, and then we could look at the Mediterranean Rim. Well, yes, but before we talk about the Mediterranean, let's talk just a bit in general. Europe, in general, is not identical in its dependency, because if we look at gas, for example, and there are states, and there are always states to the east of Europe that are dependent to 90, 95, 100% dependent upon Russian gas. So in France, the key word is diversification. France had anticipated a bit, and you can correct me if you wish, but the impact of the Russian decision to cut, it was less felt in France and less important to France. And so in Europe, the main idea would be to diversify the sources. And so we need strategy, we need sovereignty, European sovereignty, especially since we do buy energies, from the past, fossil energy, for 300 billion euros per year. Well, simply said, it means every Europeans spend 1 million euros every day. If you that's going to disappear if it goes on like this, as we all know. And so, on a European scale, how to do this? Yes, of course, renewable energies is the answer. Wind farms, solar panels, etc. But then, it's not in terms of pro or con renewables, but we have to defossilize energy production and play on both fronts, nuclear and renewables. And so this is more emphasized now than it has been up until the present day. And we have to have dialogue, we have to have active listening and looking at what is happening. In the past 15 years, there have been projects there have been energy projects, but northern projects transformed to the south, Norder, Eltec, etc., and other projects as well, where there was interconnection. But in a system where there's sun in the south, we will take solar energy from the south to serve Aix-la-Chapelle in the north of France, for example. And so, but how can we not give the feeling in the Maghreb countries, for example, that we're in a post-colonial situation? Well, yes, and so this energy is being used to serve our economy. So if we look at the ultimate link of interconnection, and we have to have dialogue, we have to have discussion with our members of parliament, etc. We have to find a way to install a real political debate. And then also there's a vision of development for the northern shores. Sometimes it's very asymmetrical. For example, in Morocco, if we're looking at exchange, there's difficulty in Algeria to have them accept the message of interconnection. And so we also have to have a Maghreb type of dialogue as well. With the Maghreb countries, of course, the dialogue has to be, of course, first amongst the three Maghreb countries and afterwards enlarge and go broader. And I just wanted to say that at the time we had 400,000 volts around the Mediterranean, and there was that project. But, you know, we also have to find projects that go beyond, because otherwise if we just stay on a B2B system or capitalistic system, no, this topic is very extremely imminently political, and so we need a lot of transparency on the usefulness of such and such a project. And Lise can correct me if I say that we can't really analyze these energy projects unless we go through, you know, public or private funding as well, and seeing how that's going to happen. And it needs to be supported by Europe. And of course, the European Union cannot finance everything and its opposite. And so, yes, that's a very good topic to switch to Anne-Lise. And now, Anne-Lise, maybe just a word with respect to this regarding the point of view of the CRE, the Regulatory Commission, Energy Commission. And of course, yes, with respect to Lebanon, for example, it was all the more interesting that you were mentioning that it's a region that was particularly under surveillance or very closely watched, at least. And so what about this as a case study? Well, yes, the interest of talking about Lebanon is, of course, you know, other than the geopolitical aspects that are very obvious, but there is this situation for the individuals, the inhabitants of Lebanon. So today, the electricity in Lebanon, which operator, and of course, what they get is 2 hours to between 2 and 10 hours of electricity per day. And so during a day, you have a lot of power cuts, a lot of power cuts. And of course, domestically speaking, but for all of the other activities as well, public services, water, as was mentioned before, sewage systems, and sanitary and drainage, that's all very important. Of course, the what they can offer is not well dimension, is not the right they don't have enough for their needs. And so now we have to look at those who actually trade the energy. And so now Lebanon, their bill is going to rise. They have to pay the Lebanese electric company, but also they're going to have to pay about $90 per month for a family, which is extremely high in view of the situation as we know it there. So there is no regulatory body in Lebanon yet. It has been planned in the laws and the bills to create it for quite some time now. And in our Madreg Association, we are pushing for this regulatory body to be created. And the reason is that if it is, it's, well, I'm not going to say it's going to solve all the problems, but the regulator actually has to be, you know, an independent third party. And so it will push independent production as well as the Lebanese electrical company production. And that way they can have a bit more electricity for the inhabitants. And of course, they don't stay there just watching everything with their arms crossed and twiddling their fingers, but they are looking at equipping themselves with solar panels, and that's really cropping up everywhere now throughout Lebanon. And so there is, you know, decentralized solar energy. We see a lot of that throughout the Mediterranean as well. And so we see that as being very positive since the operator is at fault and defective in its production and offer. And of course, the grid that we're all connected on, because if the people go out of the distribution system and the grid and that are still linked with their historical operator and are linked to them by contract, then what happens? That's a real topic in the Mediterranean. It's a topic, but in Latin America as well. And there is a researcher in Brazil who has come up with an article called the death distribution spiral that he wrote an article on. And so if these electrical companies, you know, this all adds up to the financial problems, and this is happening in a lot of countries. What is billed to the consumer, it's not really the energy, but usually these companies are in deficit, these electrical companies, and of course there are power cuts, and of course there's a lot of theft of electricity and unauthorized linking up to the grid. So that's the scene, the consumers, but all of the stakeholders. But we mustn't forget the population. And yes, of course, we must, I wanted to say that, with the development of these renewable energies, solar panels, wind farms, but beyond all of, and decarbonating as well, this should all enable the countries that have resources that are that can foster electricity through the wind or the sun, then how can we create a new energy system that could actually work? And so, Eric, I'm turning to you again. It's another system. It's, different. It's not gas or oil or whatever. So I'm asking you, but what about this question of security? How has that come up, and how can it be adapted to this new system then? Yes, thank you, Annabelle. Well, now just to set things down a bit, but I'm putting on my teacher's hat here. At Total Energy, and I think it's the case for other companies as well, we come back to the government demand, and only upon government demand. And so we answer to their calls for tender and bidding. So everything is very regalian. It's the major ministries, and they put out their calls for tender, and we answer and put in a bid. So, and of course, and also the others, they deal with the heads of state in the same manner. And so based on that, security in general of the facilities, our site, our activities, and with all of those that we cooperate with throughout the world, and this is a very important aspect with regards to complying with the law and regulations. It all depends on the country that we are working in and operating in. And so setting up the security system, no matter what the activity is, we do it with the national and regional authorities. And another point that's very important to keep in mind when we're talking about this is the cooperation. Of course, companies such as Total Energy seldom operates alone. No matter what the project might be, we work with other companies in the energy sector, and it's surprising really to see from the inside, because we are actually a partner and a competitor. Once a partner, once a competitor. In Lebanon, for example, with the Block 9, actually, that we've seen a lot about and read a lot about, we were linked to the DNI in Italy and Qatar with Qatar Energy and another. So when I talk about cooperation in terms of energy, the cooperation is very current in multinational organizations such as Total Energy. So with the renewables, so we're throwing out the model of safety. It's not consolidated. We realize this. Actually, the economic model is not consolidated either. And, you could just, the experts, are out there saying, and then, we see these, the thing is, we're even with our electrical cars, we're thinking, is there going to be enough for everybody? Are we going to have enough batteries or whatever needed for them, etc. And so when you talk about the safety of all of this activity, that's not consolidated either. And so we are watching over this and supporting it all. And we have a new type of threat, which is totally, or for which there's no background at Total Energy. Up until now, and even in our database, we had the oil fields and gas fields, and the models of security were quite well established. But, when we started talking about solar farms and nature-based solutions, reforesting those forests, and to get the balance back, the carbon balance, etc. And so we've been thrown into new fields of work that are unknown and for which we have no database, and we will be having to face new threats for them. For example, in Latin America, this is happening, and this is quite easy to understand. When you go to an area that was totally deforested, and underwent deforestation for economic reasons by the various companies or groups, quite often mafioso groups. And of course, so all the deforestation has been done for your own reasons, of course, while you have to reforest. And well, here you're looking at issues that are very new. And so we're discovering this as we go step by step. And, we're forced to do this step by step, because if you look at development curves in Total Energy, they're exponential. And so it's happening very fast and very with great strength. Yes, okay. So, Michel, as I know that time is running out and you will be leaving us, and so maybe there's, when you look at the questions, well, actually, I'd like to congratulate you all, because your questions are excellent. I'm going to ask an anonymous question, and so I'm going to answer this. It's the question of foreign interference or foreign meddling in government's affairs. So there is a foundation that is close to the Green Party in German, and of course they're looking at energy policies in France, and they're saying, oh no, we mustn't dramatize this. I know people from all of the political parties in Germany. They do symposiums, they have discussion and all the time and interaction, and I think the technical difficulty for these energy problems in France, it's not the German commandos, for example, that have come in. No, you mustn't believe everything you read, and sometimes there's a manophobia, and so we have to be careful. Second answer. Okay, we're talking about meddling with other, foreign companies meddling in our affairs. And so 640 million euros per year voted by the Bundestag, and these major organizations in Germany were able to have bureaus and office space all over the place in Europe and elsewhere. And this is what the English calls soft power. And so soft power, or influence in French. And so yes, they're very influential in Brussels. Well, yes, because they finance various structures. And do you know what the rapport between French and German financing of think tanks? It's 1 to 40%. It's 1 to 40. We have in France 40 times less and weaker and lesser financing for these influential or soft power structures. And so we can't do this immediately. We can't really multiply it to about 640 million euros. But this funding, is structuring, and, and Yves Saint-Jour, an ambassador, made a survey and drew up a report and said that it's just deteriorating over time. And of course, our energy presence, our discourse, and even at Total Energy, that's complicated because we need to be guided diplomatically and diplomatic supported. And of course, see, with us in France, it's not in our genes. And so we should be looking at what we could do. And, that where this roundtable is fabulous, it's because, when you go, you can go to the monde.fr. It's the grandeur de misère, the grandeur of the misery of a French influence or French soft power. So now I have to leave you. Thank you very much. And so if we stay on these Mediterranean territory, but at least on the European shores, and Lise, maybe we can talk a bit about. I found a little story. Sorry, we're going from Germany to island dwelling. So that's a huge step that I'm taking here now as a change. But so we're going to take you more to the south. These are questions that are extremely important because, once again, from the CRE point of view, this regulatory commission on energy, and of course in the Mediterranean, it's also a very primordial or primary question, as how are you going to manage this on an island situation? Well, yes, of course, we too have in France overseas areas, peripheral areas. So there's a question of production and supervision of island energy production. So it's important for us here in the Mediterranean too, although the sole Mediterranean island that we have is Corsica. But we have many in other oceans though. And so we're going to find them in the Mediterranean rim, but elsewhere in the world, we have a very high carbon rate energy mix. So it's very rare that an island be linked to a continent and that they can take advantage of nuclear energy, for example. And so there's carbon and fuel and gas, and this will have a very important cost, economic cost that's very expensive, and environmental cost that's very high as well, because generally in the ecosystems, it's very fragile. So we, as regulators, we are looking to have interaction on the topic and generate discussion on the topic. And there is a study that was done in 2017 that called upon a lot of states of the southern European states to come in with the energy, with an initiative called Clean Energy within the islands. And so we were called upon to set up something at our level. And so we did something very interesting with the Greek regulatory body, because in 2018 we had a forum on the energy transition in the islands that Nathalie Loiseau, our keynote speaker from this morning, had initiated. And so we know that this carbon mix, and we want to work together to decarbonate. And so as far as islands are concerned, that's very important. And the little circle of regulatory bodies really started around French and Greek ones. And then we went to the Italians and Portuguese. And as I was saying, the Portuguese, they're always jumping in, and they're really in there with the Azores Islands and others, Canaries as well. So we're always very close to our Portuguese colleagues. And so when we talk about, regulators, we're talking about conversion of some of the terminals. For example, the oil terminals will talk at converting into biomass, for example, or setting up new facilities for ENRs or for photovoltaic panels, and looking at production and storage as well, and stocking the energy. And that's very important to handle any unpredictable and contingencies. And so in the Mediterranean, you have two European states that are islands, that are Malta and Cyprus, and they maximize and highlight all of the problems that I've been describing, the need to greenify their mix and their energy mix. But, we tell them you need to have energy when you wish. And so it's very important that the island states look at one time or another it's good to develop internal production, but they're going to have to look to interconnect with one of their neighbors in order to have a cable to bring electricity to them when they need it. And so this is quite a recent element for Malta, because they were actually underwent another attack quite recently. I think it was in 2015, and Malta was connected to Italy via Sicily. And here too, you see that the islands help each other, and in the Mediterranean. And another project exists to interconnect Cyprus, and then there's more gas, but it's they're doubting what's happening to this pipeline with Israel, Cyprus and Greece. But there is this section on electricity, and we really believe in this even more. It's the Euro-Asian Interconnector Project, and this can link Cyprus to continental Greece and perhaps in the end, even to Israel. And another case, the last one that I would like to talk about is Corsica. Corsica, now this is not very well known, but Corsica is not electrically linked to the continental French continental grid, but through Italy. And so the Italian hookup is done by 100% Italian cable, so it's not even interconnection because it's not a link between France and Italy. It's just a cable that goes from Tuscany and goes to Corsica, that becomes, of course, a submarine cable, and then an airborne line, and then it goes through, so it feeds into Corsica, and then goes into Sardinia, just below. And so we are going to have to look into strengthening this, and so the first part will be done in 2024. So yes, it's true that this is the topic of most of what everybody is saying is dialogue, and more dialogue, which is necessary for all of this interaction. And of course, it's mostly political, concrete, and so of course it's very important. Another scale, and because you have a very macro type of dimension, international, multilateral discussions, etc. But you also have the four regional or cases that are very concrete and regional, and then very local, even more local. And so, Eric, it's true that in the case of a company, when you have activities somewhere, then you know your influence is very local, and you don't beam out that far. And so, of course, as a company, how do you set down this dialogue and this rapport with the partners, local partners, or even, you know, for activities? And so, and the questioning of businesses behind all of this. Yes, thank you. And of course, now what you have to understand for an energy company such as ours is that, you know, we go to the heart of the various populations, you know, and in what we do in a varied way in all of our activities is in our operations, we provide energy internationally, regionally, and locally. And the challenge that always comes up systematically, even not necessarily in terms of security, but properly conducting a project means to best be integrated into a national regional ecosystem. And as you were saying, in the local ecosystem, because in the end, there is a factory, there are petrol stations, etc. And so this is, you know, that the populations use. And so that's where we're at. Now, as I was saying, it's already the case with the exploration activities, and it was already the case in the distribution or retail distribution. So there were, we have petrol stations all over the world, in Asia, in Africa, and we have to ensure, and this is really at the core of the population and the lives of the inhabitants, and sometimes it's the only place of real activity and where you can charge up your telephone or your computer or whatever. It's a major place of a meeting place for the population and a part of their daily lives. And so we're also working on renewable energies in these places as well. But just wanted to say, when we follow geopolitical issues in the world, and what was said before by George Malbruno, when he said that, you know, with the populations and what they experience, we follow that because the first victims of poor perception of foreign affairs policy abroad, and we're the first ones hit. It's Total Energy, and we will be impacted first, even before the French embassy, because we are actually a soft target for the populations. And so just based on that, and our duty for national, regional, and local work is for militaries or former military officers or soldiers. But compared to a multinational company like Total Energy, we have to in an industrial project, we are able to place several hundreds of millions of dollars in this type of activity to accompany certain projects based on the fact that an industrial project with a certain population or a given population, you have to bring the population in with us. And this is really the case more and more today. And we internally at Total Energy, we can act as a concerted effort with all of these projects in all. And the more emblematic, and it's not necessarily successstory, but if you see real concrete activities in the field, this is Mozambique. And just as a smart story, we had to evacuate our site in Fungi in the north of Mozambique, bordering Tanzania, because of a jihad attack. And so we went to a situation of force majeure, and we needed to create the condition of taking up business again. And so securing the site and societal activity as well. And today it's quite impressive to see, but if you go to the Afungi site or in that region or in the Cabo Delgado province in north of Mozambique, you'll see that all of these societal activities, very concretely, we funded farms, we funded bakeries and factories, etc. And so little tiny villages. Here you'll see that children have Total Energy bicycles, etc. We have put lighting into the entire village around the site so that the population directly is interested in our project. And in the Afungi site, what is very concretely consumed at the cafeteria, all of these products are produced locally. The meat, the bread, everything is bought by their operators, by the company, and so they create this interest. And that way they can marginalize the insurrection around our site. And that's starting locally, but in the general plan, the idea was to extend it to the regional level and national level, where you have even more ambitious projects over the longer term linked to education, employment, created around the project by Total Energy, which is the operator, and all of its partners.
Merci beaucoup, Eric.
Thank you very much, Eric, for all of this. And clearly, we don't always have a vision, the same kind of vision from outside the company the way you do. But when it comes to social acceptability issues, which is the big thing, of course, social acceptability exists in Europe when we talk a little bit about things like demonstrations against wind farms, be they onshore or offshore, or nuclear power plants. And this can be highly determining, particularly when it comes to the lack of implication as far as the local populations are concerned, who don't want anything to do with the projects, and who wonder why these projects exist and why this whole notion exists, that is being local and acting global, so that the energy can be used by the entire ecosystem, it's absolutely essential. So what I suggest we do now is to go to the questions. We have one or two of them, but I'll have to move a little bit because I can't see these questions. So let me stand up here. I can see some questions that I need to look at as far as the power is concerned, wearing my FRS hat, and particularly the link between energy security and food security, and particularly as far as the Mediterranean is concerned. If I've understood the question properly, it's saying, yes, yes, that's right. So regarding the second question, in point of fact, if I've understood it properly, it has to do with the space needed for developing wind farms, or either onshore or offshore, but in this case onshore. At this stage, we can't really say that there's any rivalry or any reasons for this, but as you said, Eric, just a few moments ago, you have this energy transition dynamic, and announcements are made, but the announcements again need to be put in place. We're not always talking about the same subject when it comes to food security, and there are reasons for this, particularly import reasons with places like the Ukraine, where local production can be important and where people have been involved for far much longer. And in addition to this, the question's been taken off the board. But apart from that, let me say that renewable energies come with a principle, and that is that not the idea, as far as the Mediterranean is concerned, is to avoid rivalry between whether we're going to use space for growing or space for providing energy, and particularly developing solar energy or solar power, for example. Whether it's for onshore or offshore or wind farms, we need to be able to keep enough space on land for growing food. But I'm going to hand over to you for the marine, the sea questions. It's a very legitimate question, of course. Sabotage has happened, as you know, on the gas pipes, and at CRE where I work, where we deal with technical and economic issues rather than sabotage, people ask us to say how much it's going to cost to put it back into normal operating regime. And it's not impossible that in the future we'll have to have something to say about how we can secure these resources and what it's going to cost, basically, and particularly increasingly in the future. And interconnections cost a lot of money, and increasingly so, and particularly for the cable market. There are projects that we were able to validate at one point in time, but since costs have spiraled, we might have to leave a few projects to one side because they might cost far too much. When it comes to guaranteeing energy independence in Europe, which is a big, big question and also a very ambitious one, what I find interesting about all of that being that there are plenty of places that tend to be independent from the power point of view, energy point of view. For example, the US and Russia. I know I'm stating the obvious, but the thing is that in Europe, in any case, the continent doesn't have a lot of power. Why? Because historically we used to use a lot of coal, fossil fuels, and remember that in Holland there was a gas field that in Groningen that had to be closed down in 2019 because there were problems with earthquakes in that part of the country, and also the fact that that these problems were due to overexploitation of the reserves, and gas reserves have tended to drop as well because they were trying to supply everybody. But when it comes to energy resources, when it comes to renewable energies and decarbonated energy, it's an advantage to be able to provide people with a bit of independence, and this is producing on the spot and using it on the spot. And that is one way of looking at energy or power. That is the supply of energy or power, but also the fact that in France that particular subject has to do with power sobriety that we're hearing far more about more recently. And quite apart from talking about reducing our requirements, we need to be able to talk about availabilities as well. If you do have limited availabilities as far as energy is concerned, it may happen sooner or later that other factors will lead you to have less energy, and in that case demand will have to be adjusted at the same time. Very important for electricity, because the power grid has to be balanced, and if at one point in time you got an imbalance, you can reach a blackout situation. And in that case, when we work hand in hand on decarbonating energy and working on the supply of energy, and at the same time working on demand, we can reduce problems. It will require efficiency and also people's implications. Eric, it looks like you wanted to say something about this. Not necessarily about costs, but how to protect the resources. At Total Energy, the cost of protection isn't a question for us. And more recently, security in a multinational setting in the power business, and particularly at Total Energy, has become something new. Ever since what happened in 2021 with the attacks, and particularly after what happened too in 2015, as far as we were concerned, it was a great shock for us at Total Energy. This really meant having a new person in charge, that is General Favier. And the model has changed, the way in which we protect our sites and protect our people. The model we were using at the time that that people who've been working for the company for a long time have always been using is how can we protect not only our own people, but also at the same time for the people who are working today, and we're trying to consolidate protection for them. And what's happening around the world is helping us to consolidate the model, is to be more on the anticipation side and integrate safety and security and protection matters, and do that as early as possible in the course of a power project. So when a project leader from the company gets involved, he's necessarily going to have to have been able to talk with people in the security department, and that's where things get a little bit complicated when it comes to the duration of a project, which can go on for 15 to 20 years. But then again, all of this comes with a cost, and the rationale being basically cost-based. And when it comes to protecting sites for such a long period of time for a project, we need to dimension this as best we can to begin with, and we call a security philosophy, in order to get the figures right. Thank you. I saw another question, and it's for you, on the potential of the gas fields in the Mediterranean. I don't know whether you can read it, can you? The question being, is this part of the discussions that you're having? Well, as far as the interconnection facilities are concerned, they cost a lot of money, both for electricity and also for gas. Whether we're talking about projects in Europe or with countries outside of Europe, we've got to be able to make sure we can make ends meet. And at the same time, we need to have a power interconnection with places like Ireland, because Great Britain, having left the European Union, the Irish no longer had access to the European grid. And that's why there had to be a new connection of 550 kilometers of cable had to be laid between France and Ireland, and the European Union put in something like 500 or 600 million euros for that project. And when it comes to the European objectives in relation to climate protection, gas facilities are no longer eligible, which means that it's going to be harder to make ends meet without European financial support, and a lot of European financial support. Thanks a lot. I think we can take a final question, and then after that I'm going to have to close it down, even if I could stay here for a little bit longer, and I'm sure you would too. So let me take a quick look at the board, or the screen, I should say, and regarding the question on Syria. It's an interesting question, actually, because often we don't talk much about Syria anymore, but there are projects as far as Syria is concerned, but not for Europe, but for Gulf countries involving Syria, and also going as far as Turkey. And ever since the war, it's no longer been possible, and politics have no longer enabled us to talk about this type of possibility because of the collateral damage. Because if regionally there is no more political stability and you can't build infrastructure safely and do this in a number of countries at the same time, then those projects will come to a standstill. And in that case, of course, this is going to mean doing something overland. And maybe Eric could say something about the overland connections. Yes, regarding safety, security, of course, the big thing today being sanctions, international sanctions. Very, very hard, if not almost impossible, for a company to work in a country that's undergoing an international embargo, as it were. And we had to leave a country that the Americans had put an embargo on. And I remember that multinational companies, as a rule, can't always get involved because when it comes to the infrastructures, they can have a big effect on the company's financing. So sorry to finish up on a sad note, but since we've been saying since the beginning of the session, and since we've been able, there's going to be a new speech in the amphitheater in a few moments' time. We're going to have to go upstairs to the third floor. So thank you for your presence and thank you for your participation.